Hello, hello. It's me, Natasha, from the London Embroidery School. And as promised, I decided to pop on here today to do a little stitch along and have a bit of a chat with you guys whilst I work on one of our most newly released classes, the Introduction to Embroidery Ammonite design. So that's what I have here in front of me. Thanks for joining me today. As always, if you've got any questions or comments that you want to leave in the messages box below, please do feel free to leave those for me. I will try and check them periodically whilst I'm stitching, and hopefully we'll catch any questions that you guys might have. As I say, this is one of our newest release classes, and it is aimed at complete embroidery beginners. So we really do talk to you about how to start off with embroidery, going from absolute basic level. So we talk to you about how to frame up your hoop, how to thread up the needle, what different size needles to use for different things, how to make a knot in your embroidery thread, all those important things that you need to know. I have handpicked a little selection of favourite bits from the class to show you today, just to give you a little bit of an idea of what's included, what you could achieve with this class if you are an absolute beginner, or if you have some embroidery knowledge already that you want to build upon, then what we might be able to offer to you. Excuse me. Most of the time with embroidery, particularly when you're starting off, an awful lot of people are quite self-led, self-taught, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. We all need to start somewhere, and I think if it's something that gets you stitching, then that is really important and worthwhile, and the best way to start is to start. That being said, there are some good habits that you can get into, and the sooner you learn good habits, the less space there is for bad habits to form when you are stitching, which, as you hopefully progress in your embroidery journey, may well set you up for greater success later. If you're not sure, how much time you're going to be able to dedicate to embroidery, and you're like, well, I don't really need to be setting up good habits, I just want to have a go, that's also absolutely valid. And yeah, as I say, anything that gets you started is the best way to start. But we'd like to show you some things that are going to make, hopefully, your life a little bit easier and therefore the journey that bit more enjoyable, which hopefully should encourage you to do more embroidery, which is what we're all here for. So at the moment, I'm working on one of the very basic stitches that we talk about in the class. As you can see, the Ammonite design is this big sort of swirl, and we start in the center with a running stitch, and then we do a back stitch over here, and then we're working currently on a whipped back stitch. So I'm doing the back stitch part of that whipped back stitch because I wanted to show you some things that hopefully will kind of spark your imagination and get you a little bit excited. And I think this is a lovely one because running stitch and back stitch really are considered to be the absolute sort of like basic stitches for embroidery. So whipped back stitch is that just like half a step on from back stitch, and in a second I'm going to add the second colour which makes it whipped, and you'll see just how exciting that can make one of these really bog basic standard stitches. It can still be really fun and exciting and look really lovely. So maybe we'll just do one more line of the back stitch. You'll see with the back stitch, as the name suggests, you go forwards and then you go back on yourself to join the line to the stitch you've previously done. So we go forwards in order to come back. The needle just comes through the fabric perpendicular to the fabric, keeping it nice and smooth and straight. So let's leave that needle over there to the side for a moment. I've been working with the chenille needle, which is the longer and thicker of the two needles that we have. And that is so that we could work with many strands of our skein. The whole piece of embroidery thread is called a skein, FYI, which you might not know as a beginner. So now I'm just going to take the light blue. I'm going to have two strands of this. Again, something else that we talk about in the class itself is how to effectively separate your strands. So you want to pick as many strands as you want in one side and keep the rest of them in the other. And then placing your fingers sort of into making the thread into a Y shape, you can then allow it to very naturally untwist, leaving you with the right number of spare strands that we can put to one side and the right number of strands to work with that we actually wanted without it getting twisted or damaged or anything. Threading up the needle. Again, we talk about this in the class. That was the bloom into the eye method, which basically means that you squeeze the thread closed and then you allow it to sort of bloom open into the eye of the needle. But there are 4 methods of threading up an embroidery needle that we talk about. So you can choose one that suits you. Because we're not all the same, but as long as you've got a good solid method on how you like to thread up the needle that will carry you through, then that is great. That one is only my personal preference. So here we are whipping that back stitch. By selecting a contrasting colour, we can really highlight the differences between the two threads that we've got, and we get this lovely twisted effect to the back stitch. The whipping stitches cover over the little sort of divot between the back stitches that we created and gives much more of a uniformed look to the thickness of the stitches, whilst adding the extra interest of the additional colour and twisting detail. And I mean, watching me, I'm sure you can see just how easy this is. You absolutely could handle doing this. You could make something really lovely from this. So we just bring the needle up, always working from one side over to the other in the same direction so that the twist of our whipping stitches remains the same each time. And then when we get to the end, we just drop the needle back down and pull the thread through to start the next line. You will also notice that my thread is, my hoop is tensioned very tightly. And as I mentioned earlier, that is one of the things that we talk about, how to frame up your hoop effectively. It makes it so much easier to work on, and with beginner embroiderers I very often see that the embroidery hoops have quite a lot of slack in them. There's far too much movement in that fabric that makes for a much more difficult stitching experience and leads to all sorts of issues that many beginners come up against, like puckering and pulling. And so, as I say, getting those good basic skills in place really does help you from the beginning in order to enjoy your new hobby in the most effective way. Right, so that's a little demo of the whipped back stitch. Just going to leave my threads over to the sides, can finish them off later. Next up, I thought that we would try some of our daisy stitch down here, which is denoted in the floral area, unsurprisingly. So I'm going to go back to my dark blue thread. This time I'm just going to take a single strand, and I'm going to take our finer embroidery needle, which is a size 10. That won't mean very much to you at the moment, but that's okay. You'll get a feel for sizes of needles and that as you go along. You'll also notice I keep on doing these quick knots. We can show you how to do those. We have a pro tip on that if you want to just check that out for something that you could pick up today as a key skill. We have a whole playlist of pro tips on our YouTube channel, which all have interesting and fun different ways for you to do the things that we as professional embroiderers use each and every day in the studio. And there are many, many tips on there. So if you fancy checking out something that you could learn today, that is a great place to start. One of the tips on there is about stitching with two hands. Now, you may not have noticed, but I am purposefully not stitching with both hands today, which is how I naturally would stitch because I've been doing this for many years. But beginner embroiderers aren't going to be doing that. You naturally will want to use your dominant hand, and particularly when you are starting off, then that is absolutely fine. You need to do what is easiest to get you going. So when you are stitching just with the one hand, it's going to be your dominant hand, which happens to be my right hand, and so that's what I'm trying to do today, and keeping the left hand on the side of the hoop. But again, if you want to see where you could go with some time and some patience, then the stitching with two hands pro tip is a really great one to look at. So for the daisy stitch, by the time you are coming to this, you will have already done a section over here which is chain stitch, and daisy stitch is built off of a single chain stitch basically. So you come up and down on the same spot, creating a loop on the surface which you just want to make sure doesn't have a twist in it, and then you come up on the edge of the petal into the loop that you formed and gently allow that loop to tighten around the holding stitch that you create. Get that to a nice tension to match the shape of the print underneath, and then pull through to the bottom to finish the stitch, and then we just keep coming up on this center spot so that all of our petals join together in order to make a little flower shape. During the course we work, as I say, with different weights of needle, different weights of thread, and how you can combine them so that you get a really comprehensive look at the 12 stitching techniques and styles that we talk about in this particular design. And you can probably see in the background, but this would be one of the finished pieces. So that's the whipped back stitch there that we were just working on. We're working on the daisy stitches over here. We'll do a little bit of sequins in a minute, and you can see all of the 12 stitch techniques plus the extra little loose tassels of our Ammonite over from the open side, which just gives them a little bit of character, I think. But you can see what a beautiful piece it makes in the end. Something that you could be really proud of and really like to hang on to. What sort of stitching projects have you guys got on at the moment? Have you already started something, or are you thinking about starting embroidery? I mean, the summer is a great time to pick up embroidery. Something like this is really easy to take to the park with you, with your threads, your hoop, with your fabric in it, and just a little pair of snips for when you need them. And, you know, find yourself a nice shady spot, while away a few hours, Sounds delightful. Where are you guys based as well? Because obviously I am talking about that from the UK, as we are the London Embroidery School, and we are in full summer here, but I am always aware that quite a few people tend to join us from overseas, so it's always interesting to know where you would be looking to do your embroidery and what it's like wherever you are at the moment. I'm having quite a chilled day on here. Today is in fact my birthday, and so I thought I would schedule this stitch along as something nice to do. A nice few hours just setting up, chatting with you guys, doing a bit of hand stitching, you know, keeping it all nice. Thank you to Lyrically Linda, who says happy birthday. That's very sweet of you. Thank you so much. See, this is why I schedule a stitch along for days like my birthday, because I'm like, this will be a nice thing to do. It's always nice to talk to some nice people, do some nice stitching. It's just nice, you know? So there you can see how the daisy stitch builds up. It's very calming, I always think. It's one of the great positives of hand embroidery. Just gives you that time to be a little bit quiet. Well, not for me, apparently. But, you know, that time to sort of do something quite meditative, quite repetitive, but in a really lovely sort of way. And just kind of quiet your mind a little bit. I think it really helps to ground you. So I'm going to move on to the next technique, for which we will be using a sewing thread. Going back in with my finer needle. Threading up that sewing thread. Again, little quick knot into the end. So we're working in this section over here with the dots, which is what we're going to fill with some beads and sequins. And as if I was on Blue Peter, here's some I prepared earlier. Now, because we're adding some weight, we always like to start off with a few anchoring stitches just on the spot, and quite literally on one of these spots. And then once we've got that in place, we can not tip our beads everywhere. Let's grab all of those back. Try and flatten it out a bit. So we grab a sequin, we grab one of our seed pearls. Ease that down, we go back through the sequin on the spot, and we allow that thread to tighten. We come up on the next spot, we grab a sequin, we grab a bead, we go back down through the sequin. So using the bead as the anchor for the sequin and allowing us to add a little bit of texture and come up off the surface of the fabric with this stitching technique. I think people are often surprised with how slow, I guess, beading is. I think people often think that beading is going to be a quick technique because you're adding a pre-made thing to the fabric, but actually, in order to kind of account for the weight of that addition and the amount of coverage that you actually get is relatively low. So, like with almost all things with embroidery, none of it is fast. It's all at its own pace. It takes as long as it takes. and that's part of the beauty of it, in my opinion. I really like this section, but I think that's probably because I am myself a little bit of a magpie. Unsurprising that I ended up in the line of work that I did, given that I am such a fan of sparkly, shiny things. So this section really pleases me. With this technique, you can see that we are just working back and forth on ourselves. We're able to work in lines, unlike with the back stitch where we were really looking to always work from one direction going forwards in order to make sure that it all stays looking the same. With this one, you're really dealing with each stitch individually. So you're able to kind of just work in the area as it best suits you. So we need a couple more beads, I think. I try not to have too many beads or sequins out at a time, so that if I do knock the board or the hoop, then I don't lose loads and loads of them. It basically roots from having made that mistake far too many times and not having learned from it. So now I must learn from it. I must enforce that for myself and encourage you to do the same. Little and often replenishing your supplies is definitely the best way around that. So perhaps just a few more, because I really like them. A little bit like so. Oh, that one's getting away from me. Did you see that? This here is a velvet board, in case you are curious. They are actually for gold work, but I find them quite useful to use as a beading mat as well. It works the same as what they are designed for with gold work, which is to make sure that your cut bullion doesn't spring around too much, doesn't roll away. It stays where you want it. And so when you are working with beading and that sort of thing, it works in exactly the same way. It just gives you that little bit of grip because it's made of velvet. So the pile of the velvet, the little sort of fibrous fingers, if you like, of the fabric helps to grip on to the items that you put on it, whether that's beads and sequins or cut work, and just give you that little bit of grip. And also something to kind of push against when you are picking up beads and sequins. Okay, let's put that to one side. Come back over here. And so then the last thing that I wanted to show you guys today was going to be our French knots section, which I have to say I'm also really pleased with on this one. I gave it a little bit of an ombre type effect using all of the colours in this section, but you can fill it however you like, so long as you fill it with French knots and master the technique, of course. Also showing the different sizes of French knots that you can use. You can really play around and get artistic with French knots, which is one of the things that I really love about them. So I'm first up going to grab what's left over of my light blue thread. threading that up into the chenille needle, using that same favoured method of mine, which you can see works really well even when you're working with many strands, which is often something that people struggle with when they are threading up their needles, is when you've got multiple strands hanging on to all of them together and getting them to work effectively. So when we are ready to start stitching, let's start up this end. We will come up through the fabric. We wrap the thread around the point of the needle, then turn the point down into the fabric, pretty much where we came up through the fabric, while still hanging on to the loose piece of thread and giving that some tension. We ease the needle through the fabric, allowing that to pop through, and then easing that loose thread through itself. So let's do that again. We come up through the fabric, we hang on to the loose thread, we wrap, point the needle down through the fabric, hang on to this loose thread and ease it all the way through into a nice tidy little knot. This one even sounds satisfying. I hope that's coming across to you on the audio here, but it just sounds great to me. I love that pop of the thread through well-tensioned fabric. And this fabric is really nice and easy to tension effectively. It is a cotton drill that we're working on, so it's really nice, stable, woven fabric, medium weight. Takes the print of the design really well. Very satisfying to stitch on. And these you can make as dense or as sparse as your heart desires. You might be surprised at just how thread thirsty this particular technique is. You can see we're really burning through the thread. We tend to work with a fingertip to elbow length piece of thread, as that is always a good measure of how much thread you can effectively control without starting to really tax yourself. So what I mean by that is that when we're stitching, again, we want to get into those good habits, and one of those good habits often can be making sure that you are good and comfortable and looking after your body whilst you're starting this new skill. So we want to make sure that we've got good light. We want to make sure that you're sitting in a good, comfortable chair, that your back is supported, but also that you are choosing the right length thread to work with, so that all of the strain of it, if you like, is controlled by your forearm, and you don't have to bring the shoulder really into making your stitches. That's when it becomes very tiresome, because you're like flinging your arms all over the room trying to get to the end of the thread. Go for a fingertip to elbow length piece of thread when you are embroidering. It's a good controllable length. It also means that you will have run out of thread before the thread gets too tired. Now, I know that sounds silly, but when you are passing the thread through the fabric, you put it under a lot of pressure, a lot of tension. And the more you pass it through the fabric, the more fluffy the thread wants to get. Naturally, it's coming up against the friction of the fabric. So if you use a fingertip to elbow length piece of thread, you will likely run out of thread before it gets to that fluffy stage, and therefore you will have a nicer, more consistent finish to your embroidery. If you're going longer than that and parts of it are becoming fluffy, then you will see that some parts will be a fresh thread when you first thread it up, and will, be very smooth. And then as the thread wears on, it gets fluffier and fluffier and will look scruffier than the bits of the embroidery you already did with a fresher thread. So this sort of length thread, which is roughly my fingertip to elbow, makes for a good controllable length for many reasons. Now I've just threaded up again, this time with only 2 strands, just to show you the size difference that you can achieve. We could go all the way down to 1 strand if you wanted to, but I've just gone to 2 for now, so hopefully you can still see it nice and clearly on screen. So these bigger ones are 4 strands, which we worked in our chenille needle to make the threading up of those 4 strands that bit easier. And now we've got the contrast of the 2 strands, just allowing us to add a little bit of variety. And also to kind of add some blending. As I mentioned earlier, over here, this section that you can see of the finished design being the French knots. If you want to do a sort of embroidery effect like I did, you don't have to, you could just do a full scatter of all the colours, but it kind of helps to sort of blend the smaller sizes into the next colours section. We have 4 main threads for this design and 1 ombre thread, but we don't use the ombre thread in this section. But it just helps, if you can see here, to allow some of the little blue ones to bleed up into the next colours section to get a smooth colour blending finish. We do seem to have a bit of a shell theme going on at the moment. Our last kit that we put out was not an online class like this one is, but was just a little goldwork taster kit, which was the clamshell patch kit. So if you are enjoying the seasidey Little Mermaidy vibes that are going on with our current new releases, then do check that one out as well. That one is for a bit more of an intermediate stitcher. I suggest that you have done a little bit of stitching before trying that one. So you want to have done something like this as a beginner's general embroidery kit to get a good grounding of embroidery techniques in general, and then you can start to dip into some of the more specific techniques within the field of embroidery. So that, as I say, could be something like goldwork, which is all about metal embroidery. Or you could expand the beading side of things if that's the part of this design that really takes your fancy and you want to explore more really shiny things. Then you could look into some of the more sort of beading specialisms in embroidery like timbre. Or you could go for the beaded coral 3D class if you enjoy the 3D elements of this. Then we also have that class there, which really digs in to making textures and really picking up the features of beaded pieces. Actually, I have that one here. That one looks a bit like this. So really getting into the nitty gritty of what you can do with beads and sequins. Also lovely summery vibes from that one. And as this isn't our most recent class, but this is a goldwork piece for comparison. If you are new to embroidery and are not sure what the differences are, these are all metal-based threads that we build off of. There's several different types in here with the passing, smooth pearl, rough pearl, bright check. We've got some Japanese thread up the top here and lots of different techniques. This is really much more advanced than this piece here, but as I say, we've all got to start somewhere, and that's the important thing. So I think that brings me to the end of everything that I wanted to cover with you guys today. I hope you found it interesting and hopefully a little bit achievable. As I say, these kits are for absolute beginners. We talk you through everything you need to know, from preparing your fabric, preparing your frame, threading up, making knots, all the things someone from absolute scratch would need to know and be walked through, and we can do that for you. All of these classes are online classes and they are self-timed, so they're pre-recorded classes and you can therefore do them when it suits you. You're not trying to fit in with a Zoom timetable or anything like that. If you need to stop and answer the door because your postman comes like mine did, then you can do that. And if you want to rewind, go back over a section that you didn't fully feel like you grasped, you can absolutely do that because you have open access to those classes. Once they are purchased, they are yours, and you can access them from the members section of our website. If you fancy joining the community, this is a really great place to start this summer. Thanks to everyone who's joined me today. It's been lovely chatting with you guys. I've had a lovely time as always, so thanks for being delightful. I'm going to head off now and finish some of my other stitching for things that I will be bringing you later this year. I'm very excited about those. Hopefully you will like them. That's more of a PDF kit. I like to always share a little tidbit on these stitch-alongs for something that you won't get to know anywhere else, and that's my one for today. There's a new PDF kit coming later this year. I wonder if you can guess what you think it might be. Do drop me a comment if you have any guesses or any hopes of what it might be. Anyways, I've waffled on for quite long enough. That's all for me from today. Have fun, stitch well, and keep making beautiful things. Bye for now.